you see my screen? Let me know. Good, wonderful. Then I'm going to jump into presentation mode and we'll get started. So I'm so excited to be jumping into this work for reading identity with all of you, because this is the work that I have been really focused on, especially in the last 7 years, but certainly since I started teaching. Especially now, because when I think about reading identity, it's really just identity. And so all of the master classes I've been focused on this summer, given this incredible opportunity, have really been focused on how do we create a community where students can feel safe in the most basic ways, so that their entire being is safe and valued, and that they have a space within our classroom and in our community, and also that they can develop and advocate for themselves, not just as far as what their educational needs are, but also what they need from a human being standpoint. And so reading is where a lot of my work has been focused on, but this is really very broadly. So this first master class is kind of going to give us a little bit of the bird's eye. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right into it. So I was going through old pictures of my classroom, and I don't have a lot. We lost a lot of pictures about 9 years ago, and they were a lot of the pictures from my early years of teaching. But I found this picture about 3 years into my teaching degree. This is clearly my classroom set up before the students actually showed up. If you could zoom in and see what's written on the board, it's instruction to the adult caregivers and where they should be doing their surveys, etc. But what struck me with this picture was this shows just how where I started. If you notice our library, it is tiny, and also notice there's not a lot of books on display. The thing is, this was my classroom for a lot of years, and this would have been the experience that many of you, if you had walked in, you would have been like, oh, well, this doesn't look terrible. It looks like she knows what she's doing. She's got a lot of orderly and systems and routines, and she's got the beginning of a classroom library. This was after I had weeded out a lot of my books. And yet, I think it's really important for me to embrace that I used to be an okay teacher. Now, this is not to say I am now the most amazing, incredible teacher ever that has walked the earth, but I will say that in the years since 2011 and this picture, my craft has certainly become much deeper and much more reflective, and also a lot more student-centered. And so I invite you into the work that I do alongside my, 80 or so plus students at Oregon Middle School here in Oregon, Wisconsin, not as an expert, but rather as a teacher who has been trying for a really long time to make this educational system that I have to function within work for every single one of my students, and not just the students who already know how to navigate school, where school is automatically a safe place due to their identity, or where they already feel like they have figured out all of the unhidden rules and assumptions that navigate our spaces. So if there's anything I can have you take away from today, it's really that this is a story of a teacher who tried and who continues to try, and who right now is sitting and waiting for her district to release guidelines for what the fall is going to look like. I'm assuming it's going to be some sort of hybrid, but who is still trying to figure it out. Because what has happened in my journey, much like in yours, is that every year the kids come to us needing different things. Even throughout the year, they need different things. And so one of the biggest things that I've had to learn is, what are the tools that I can use year after year, and how can I continue on my own journey with this work? When I moved to 7th grade from 5th grade, I was very nervous. I didn't know what to expect when it came to 7th grade English. I had never, for a long time, I had not been teaching a subject specific, but I was excited, nervous, but excited. The 7th graders looked so much bigger than the 5th graders that I was used to. I remember when I told my 5th graders that this was going to be the last year that I was with them, and they looked at me in kind of mock horror and said, "Why would you ever go and teach 7th graders, Mrs. Ripp? 7th graders are scary." And while I put on a brave face, there was a lot of times that I thought to myself, why did I leave the safety and comfort of my 5th graders, who I knew and felt pretty good with teaching, into this middle school year where we know that kids really can start to express their opinions even louder than they did in the earlier years? I spent a lot of time in my classroom setting it up that first summer. I still do. It's been hard for me to be out of my classroom right now. I got to know our amazing custodian, Doug, really well, and he would bring in fans because my school shuts down the AC, and I would work through the 90-degree days trying to figure out how I was going to create an enticing English experiences for the 150 plus kids that were going to show up. Finally, as August wound down, September came closer. I was standing in my classroom, putting the finishing touches on our classroom library, meticulously putting all these books on display that I hope would bring kids into a reading experience, when in walks a mother and her child walks after her. She comes up to me and she goes, "You must be Mrs. Ripp, the new English teacher." And I stuck my hand out and said, "Yes, I am." And I turned to her son and I said, "Don't you just love reading?" Her son looked at me with kind of a blank stare and looked at me and then said, "I don't read, thanks," and promptly walked out the door. His mom turned to me apologetically and said, "Yeah, reading's definitely not his thing, but we are always hoping." And I thought to myself, what have I done? Because in fifth grade, my students would, for the most part, lie to my face right away. They're still trying to please the adults in some unnatural and unhealthy ways, but they would tell me as the year went on how much they didn't like reading. But here in seventh grade, they couldn't wait to tell me how much they didn't love reading. And the thing is, I shouldn't be surprised, because mirrors my own journey with my own children. My children have grown up in a home that has been flooded with books. They have been afforded a lot of privilege in the home that they have grown up in, and also from the color of their skin and from our middle class background and the resources that we access. And yet, despite raising my children in reading positive environments, my own daughter in second grade came home and told us one day that she didn't think that she was going to be a reader because reading is just too hard. And I remember sitting and thinking to myself, how have we failed her? We have filled her book or her room with books. We have done read alouds. We celebrate reading in this family. We don't tie rewards into it. We read as a family. And yet for her, reading was this mystery that no matter how hard she worked, she couldn't seem to unravel the words that were on the page. And I think about this all of the time, that this is what I worry about so much. Oh, something just happened. Let's try that again. Sorry. That we assume that kids have these beautiful reading experiences, and if they have those, then surely they become readers. But we know in our own classrooms that this is not the case. Kids can have beautiful reading experiences that follow all of the guidelines set forth by people who know more than me, and yet come to us and not have a relationship to reading, or have a very negative relationship to reading. And vice versa, kids can come to us not having been invested in deep reading environments, either by choice or circumstance, and still blossom into be beautiful readers. But I thought about this, that here was a child who was surrounded by teachers who cared deeply about her as a reader, and yet she didn't see herself as a reader because it was just something that was too hard. And so when I think about my own journey, that really sums it up in a big way. That I'm not here to just share the successes, but I'm also here to share all of the things that I've done that my students told me I shouldn't be doing, that my students have veered me out of, that the identities of the students that have been placed in my care have shown me doesn't work for them. And that one thing that I have a lot of in this world is patience, and also an incredible network of people who will share more ideas to try. Because as Evan, the same student who told me he didn't read things, reminded me of when I asked him, what should I tell other educators? He reminded me that I should tell other educators how much I have failed. And I think about this because this is important. We don't share our failures enough. Sure, the media likes to point out when we screw up, which we do, and sometimes people on Facebook and other social media platforms too. But professionally, when we sit down with colleagues, we often feel like if we start to share our failures, we will be judged as inefficient. I certainly felt that way for a lot of years when I thought to myself, well, they hired me, and so clearly I must know what I'm doing at all times. And yet, when we wrap ourselves up in this perfection myth, we are only hurting ourselves and the students that we teach. I know it takes a lot of trust to sit down and say, this is what I tried and it didn't work. But when we come to the table and collaborate around things that didn't work, then we can start to see and find answers for things that do. When we come and say, you know, it's not that I'm giving up, it's that I need other people, we can see the strength in the collaboration. And how powerful is that to model for other students? I failed to understand that for a long time. In my classroom, my students would often leave when we had independent reading time, asking to go to the library. And finally, I asked the students, why is it you always want to go to the library? We have beautiful books here and all of the things that you should need to have a deep reading life. And one of the students said, yeah, but we don't have Mr. Powers. Mr. Powers was our school librarian when I taught at West Middleton, and he knew kids and he knew books. When students entered into his library, he would pull out a stack of books and he'd go, I was just thinking about you. Have you thought about these books? I didn't read children's books at the time, something we'll talk more about in later master classes and the power of that. I thought it was enough that I modeled that I loved reading and that reading was important by giving it time in my classroom. I thought it was just as long as I had a pretty library, the kids would surely find books. And when I think about that and that picture of my classroom, it strikes me how little we spoke books at that time, because that was the thing. I had all of the components of a successful reading environment, and yet those students who hated reading, who came to me and declared that reading was not for them, it didn't change much. The kids who loved reading, I tried to protect that with all of my might, but I will say that it was more their own doing rather than anything explicit that I did that kept them reading through the years. And the thing is, because I didn't read children's books, I couldn't speak books with my students. We had an entire language that we were not accessing as a community because I hadn't realized the power of sitting down and handing a book to a child that I had also read, the power of knowing your students and knowing which texts may enrich their lives, the power of being able to sit down and have a shared community revolving around books. And the thing is, if you had walked into my classroom, you wouldn't care. You would have thought to yourself, this looks like she has it under control. We were doing readers workshop. We had all those things that we needed to create successful reading experiences. But when it came to the data meetings, it was always the same kids who didn't grow, the same kids who hadn't figured it out. And I kept thinking to myself, well, maybe next year someone will figure out those kids. Maybe next year special ed will get involved, or reading intervention. Maybe next year will be their chance to finally grow. It hit me a couple years into my teaching career that I was next year's teacher, that I was the teacher that were getting these kids passed on to them, hoping that maybe next year's teacher would figure it all out. And that's why I teach with the urgency that I do, with the dedication that I do, because we can break or make a reader or a child every single day in our classroom. And that's not a responsibility I take lightly. And so I want you to think about, do you speak books? Do you have that language integrated with your students? And if yes, how do you speak books? How do you protect it? Is it only a language that some kids are invited into, those who have already figured out the magical world of reading? Or is it a language that all kids are invited into, no matter where they're at on their reading journey? Because this is also another component, is that we cannot do this work alone. We have to be in schools where speaking books and creating passionate reading environments is at the forefront of every teacher, every staff member's mind, along with all of the other things that we need to also balance. This isn't an educational lottery where hopefully a child will get a teacher that happens to love books and have access. This should be a guarantee for every single child. And that's what I want to talk about today. How do we create equitable and inviting experiences for all kids, not just the kids that have earned it by proving that they're already readers? And so when I started to reflect back on, I am next year's teacher, I also needed to start reflecting on my own decisions. While certainly I could look at my curriculum and say, okay, well, all of these decisions have been taken out of my hands, and if the program isn't working, it's not my fault. I had to get past that and go, okay, even though I sit with a program, I also make decisions daily that harm kids' reading experiences or boosts it. And so I think about this, how often I cut out independent reading time to teach more reading skills, how I required the same process for all at all times. Choice was something you earned when you had shown me that you could handle it, or you had read the books that I wanted you to read. Teacher was centered around everything. Every conference, every discussion was planned by me, and it was exhausting. We had reading logs and worksheets and packets, all in the name of accountability, to make sure that I knew that kids were reading. And of course, when I sat there and had that inner voice in me, and we were talking about doing something that I thought might harm the reading rights of kids, I didn't stand up for them, because who was I to say something? Certainly someone else with more experience and more expertise would raise the same questions as I did, because I thought I had to do it all alone. I didn't see my colleagues as people who necessarily wanted to go on this journey with me, because we didn't have these conversations, because we didn't sit down and go, what have you done that potentially stopped a child from reading, and started planning our progress around that. So in the chat box, I'm going to ask you to reflect, or you can simply reflect in your head, or you can reflect out loud. What have you done that may have harmed the love of reading? It's a beautiful thing to sit and reflect on, even as we get a little cringy and we start to worry about the decisions we have, but we can't change what we're not aware of. And so if I don't sit and reflect over the harm that I have done, then I don't know the harm that I have done, and then I can't change anything. And so I see here, and I'm just going to make another point too, if you can make sure everybody's muted unless you're going to speak, that would be lovely. Reading logs, yes. Discouraging kids from reading easy books. We will talk about this whole label of easy books and what it does to kids in another session. Yep, not making time. Taking it personal. It's so hard to not take it personal when we put so much time in. No choice. Oh, yes, the Post-its. Refuse certain types of books. Isn't it amazing how many things we can look back on and go, you know, this might not have had the intended consequences that I had hoped for. And I think that that's it, right? That we have to constantly reflect on this question. There are things that I did last year with my students that probably harmed the love of reading, but I had to try it. And then it's also my job to make sure that I listen to the students who are now being exposed to it and have them reflect with me so that I can change my practices. And I think about this all of the time, because for the last 6 years, I've gotten to train other teachers virtually or in person around the world. And I have yet to meet a teacher whose goal it was to kill the love of reading. But it happens every single year. And I think it happens in our well-meaning intentions, that we craft these accountability measures, these ways of deepening their thinking, without thinking about the harm these practices may have. Or our voices are fully shut out, or we never raise our voices in the first place because we don't think we deserve to have a place in the conversation. And I think about this a lot, because when we look at global literacy, I looked at first at the US, that the Pew Research Center released here in February that in the last year, 27% of American adults reported not having read a single book in a 12-month period. This is ebook or audiobook or print book. And the thing is, this number hasn't changed much. I started paying attention to it maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and it has gone between 24% and 28%. We are not changing this. I cannot stop this without recognizing the harm that I may be doing in my classroom, the harm that my decisions may have on the kids that I teach, the harm that I need to stop by inviting them into this work and inviting them into this journey. And I think about this number scares me, because the 27% of kids or adults are the kids that can't wait to get out of high school and never have to read another book again. They're the kids that tell us right now that they will not read over summer. The kids that laugh when we say, do you want to read over the weekend? And these kids are going to grow into be adults that make decisions about our schools, about our curriculum, and sit on our school boards. And if 27% of American adults are sitting and saying that they don't have space or time to read because they're not finding value or life is stopping them from reading, then what is that going to do to the school experience for generations to come? And here's the other thing. Those 27%, they're having children. And along with their genetic heritage, they're also passing on this disinterest for reading onto their children, if that's where the lack of reading comes from. And I think about this. When we look at the top 10 most literate countries in 2016, right, we can see a lot of countries that have a lot of wealth. And yet, when I look at where, for example, the United States falls in this, we're 7th. This is just literate, right? This just means that someone is able to read. It doesn't mean that they enjoy it or find value in it. In fact, in America, we have an illiteracy problem. Adults that can read but choose not to. And think about how that shapes the discourse in our country. And just think about how the problems that we may have in America with literacy echoes out and impacts other nations. And I know that this is not a singular American thing. When I speak to my educational friends in other countries, my colleagues in Denmark, they say they see the same patterns. And we can stand up and we can blame technology. We can blame a world that doesn't make time for the quiet. And yes, of course, all of these pieces play into that, but so do the very real decisions that we make in our schools with where we show kids what reading and literacy means. And so I think about Frederick Douglass's words that reading is freedom, that when you can read and find value in it, you can learn about a world that you might not have access to. You can become more than what you thought you would be. You can sit down and find quiet and solitude and find deep connection with others, which in turn is going to make you more empathetic and understanding and curious about the world around you. Where is this being taught and embraced in our schools? Because if you ask most students right now why I am teaching them the comprehension skills I am, it's not about being a reader. It's about getting a good grade or doing well on the assessment or doing the project that I have assigned. And so when we look and we can find as many data points as we want, the data all shows us the same decline. And while these, again, are focused on the US, if you're sitting in a different country, which I know some of you are, look at the data coming out of your country, because I happen to know that this mirrors a lot of the conversations that I have with Danish educators and with educators in other nations. Teens don't read for pleasure. That's going down. Daily readers is going down, especially the older the kids get, etc. And I felt it, and I live it every day. My biggest challenge was not that kids couldn't read or write. By 7th grade, it was that they didn't want to, even in 4th or 5th grade. Yes, every year I teach a wide gamut of skills in my readers, but those kids where reading is truly still an obstacle, they have support. They have an incredible IEP team or reading interventionist attached to them. But I had kids that couldn't wait every single year to tell me just how much they hate reading. I do a survey every year. It's part of the work we do on reading identity throughout the year. And I asked them where they would rank reading on a scale from 1 to 10. Out of all of my students, 40% of them that first week of school chose 4 or less, and 23% said they hated to read. They chose a 1. The most common ranking was a 5, which to me equates kind of the shrug and the nod, and I guess it's fine. And only 6 kids said they loved it. This is despite being in a district that is focused on reading joy, where they have exceptional teachers before they come to 7th grade, where they are presented with inclusive libraries and literacy instruction that is centered around their needs. So what is it that's happening? Why is it that we're following best practice, but it's not enough? And so I would ask them, why did you rank it that way? And I'd like you, are there other things that your students would say? Because these are the ones I get year after year after year. What would your students say? And go ahead and add in the chat box. It's hard. Nothing to read, don't have time. All of these things, right? And so much of this has to do with identity. I don't like to read. I find it boring. I can't find a book. It's a waste of my time. I'm a slow reader. I'm a bad reader. I'm a reader. I'm not a reader, right? I have kids that say that all the time. I'm not a reader. And to think about that at 12 years old, just like my own daughter, they've decided that reading is never something they're going to do. And so we have to start looking at value. If I were to come to your school, what would you tell me that your school values in terms of reading, and how do you know? Go ahead and also answer that in the chat. Because I'll tell you, when I first came to my school, my Oregon Middle School, we were doing in-service, and our principal, Miss Anderson, Dr. Anderson, got in front of us and she said, you know, we have some of the lowest scores in all of our county for reading in 7th and 8th grade. The standardized test scores had just come out, and I thought to myself, oh, here we go. We're going to be teaching to the test, and I can't wait to not have to teach to the test. But then she said something surprising. She said, that's on all of us. She goes, we need to all cultivate a community of reading, of joyful reading, of reading to become a better person. That doesn't just fall on the English teachers. And I thought to myself, and this is why I am at this school. Because here's the thing. Whatever your school says it values, if it's grades or tests or data, that is absolutely 100% affecting the students' relationships, and not just their reading relationships, but their relationships to the school, to each other, to your community. Because if your school mostly talks about data, about test scores, and not the human beings that supposedly represents, then your students are clearly getting the message that all that matters are the numbers, the data, not them as a human. And so I think about this, that everything I want to do alongside my team in my district needs to show my students that the first thing we value is them and the relationship that they have to our school and to our reading community. And so we think about this because the data has been out there, the research has been out there. I stand on the shoulders of so many people who have done this work for decades. And yet, why is it that we can look at the statistics and look at the things that we know create frequent readers, and it's still not implemented for every single child? Why is it that I still hear from many teachers that they are told that independent reading doesn't have a place, especially in upper grades? Why is it that we are living in a society, at least here in the United States, with so much money, and yet there are kids that don't have access to books in their homes? Not all kids have adults who support them and are reading role models. Not all kids are read aloud to, not just at home, but in school. Why is it that for decades we've known this, and yet I'm still here making the same pleas that those people that have gone before me have been making for years? I think one of our problems lies with fidelity, and that's probably one of my least favorite F words. But here's another reason why I teach in the district I do. My superintendent, who used to be the assistant superintendent when I first was hired, quickly got up and said in front of a big crowd of teachers on in-service welcome
that teaching to Fidelity in our district doesn't mean fidelity to the program, but to the kid in front of us. And I think about that because that's not what happens in so many communities. We go out and we purchase a new program, and then we tell every practitioner to be on the same page at the same time because that's what matters. That's how we're going to get success. Yet we know as those practitioners that our kids need us to veer off, that the program itself should be a roadmap. And then our experience should be allowing us to fill in, to stop and slow down and speed up and add in extra things whenever we need to. But the thing is, I don't see that happening enough. Who are we keeping at the center? The people who wrote the curriculum or the children who are experiencing it? And so if we're not including children's voices when we are unpacking curriculum, the kids who this curriculum is being used for, who do we really care about? Because that's the thing. I see way too many decisions being made where it directly impacts the kids that we teach, and yet those voices are not part of the conversation. We sit in our meetings and make assumptions about how a program is playing out or how kids are responding to it without actually asking them in and inviting them into the conversation. And I think about this, that because there is incredible stress in our world, more so now than in a long time, but that's only for those of us who haven't felt all the stress before, right? But as our population not engaging as much outside of school in pleasurable literacy activities, we have to bring that into our schools. We have to give them the most valuable thing that we have in our schools, which is our time. We have to allocate resources and space that build these things, that build relationship, engagement, joy in reading, because that translates to joy in community. It translates to safety. And so I encourage you to bring your district into a reading audit. And I want you to think about, for these next few minutes here, what are the reading experiences that every child is guaranteed every day? So I don't mean those kids who are already doing well, those kids who have shown that they can handle being in a classroom all day, those kids who we would give lots of leadership opportunities. I mean every child, no matter where they are on the reading journey. Because I have seen too often that the reading experiences that children are guaranteed depends on the teacher they have. And that is highly problematic, because then we are once again putting children into an educational lottery. And so questions that we have to think about directly impact how we see students. Because when you look at a school, kids don't have the same rights. When we say we want all students to feel, that term of safe is very different depending on the child and the decisions that they make. I always bring this up in any presentation that I make about this perception research, that our assumptions shake and shape so much of a child's reality with us every single day, that the minute I have a negative perception of a child, my relationship is going to suffer. Everything I put in front of that child is going to be more rigid, more contained. I'm going to have lower expectations, and I'm going to take that perception with me and then pass it on to other adults. Flip it. The minute I think a child is a high performer, a high achiever, well, then I'm going to have a better relationship with that child. I'm going to give them much more open-ended, creative classroom lessons and opportunities in order to develop the skills that I'm seeing hints of. I'm also probably going to give them more grace, more benefit of the doubt. My laser eye focus isn't going to be on them quite as much, even if they're pulling the same stuff that other kids are pulling. And again, I impact every single adult that I talk to about this child because of my perception. But how much of our perception is tied in with the biases we carry about how we see kids? I think about Liz Kleinrock's words about how we have to stop thinking that students are broken. Students are not broken. They are fully realized human beings, to quote Ariel Johnson, that they come to us fully realized. Our job is to help protect them on their journey, to make them feel safe and valued. And so we have to start thinking about, what are the practices in place? What are your hopes for every single reader? We have to think about, what does the research say? Because it's not enough to just go off our assumptions and things we think we might have learned. And then we have to stop and pause. Whose voices are missing in our conversation? Is it only white people sitting at the table? How is that going to impact the decisions and the conversations that we have? Is it only teachers? Is it only a certain age? Who is not present in our conversation? Because whose voices are missing impacts us in a deep and fundamental way. How do we translate these great hopes into actual experience? So then we create reading rights and we commit to them. And so questions that you can talk about, and I write about this on my blog as well, and I do work around this and support districts through this, is, first of all, how are librarians supported? And what is funding allocated to? Because I have been in too many districts where they had beautiful technology, and yet when I looked around in the classroom, I only saw a tiny little bookshelf with 35 copies of To Kill a Mockingbird. And that was deemed the classroom library. I don't understand it. Yes, of course, in this pandemic teaching, we need technology, but we also need books. And we need books in the hands of every child, not just ebooks. That's just more screen time, but physical print books that children can develop a relationship with. And we need to protect our librarians, because in the US and other places around the world, we are losing librarians. And this is scary to me, because librarians aren't just, beautiful book checker outers. They do so much more. Here's just some of the things that certified full-time librarians provide for a school. And if you want more data, please go to the article linked at the bottom. We have to, as a staff, protect the people who are in our buildings. We have to raise our voices in school board meetings and fight for our librarians, or fight for librarians to come in. We have to go to the library, dedicate time to spend in the heart of the school, because that is what the library should be. This doesn't mean, and we'll talk more about this in the next master class, that we don't have our own classroom collections. We need both, because kids need to be surrounded by books at their fingertips at all times. Other questions that we need to ask is, how much time is each child guaranteed for self-selected, joyful, independent reading time each day? This isn't time where we sit down and post-it note. This isn't time where we stop and jot or turn and talk or any of the other things that we have kids do in our reading work. This is time with a book of their choosing. This is time with a book that they want to try. This is providing them with scaffolds so that they can access the books they want to read, not saying you can't read that because it's too easy or it's too hard, or try this one instead. It's saying that audiobooks count, that ebooks count, that graphic novels count, that picture books count. And for the kids who fight us every day, and we'll talk more about this again, we have a huge superpower, and that is patience. For the children who don't read, I can slide beautiful picture books in front of them every day. I can give them an iPad with audiobooks, and I can hit play for them. I can partner them with other kids who maybe were on that same journey but have moved since then, and who can take them along one more step. And every day I can try again. We also think about, what are we allowing students to read, whether it is an actual dictated reading list, which I still see being floated around, especially over summer and with older students. And then, who are kids expected to read? So even if it's not any kind of censorship and gatekeeping, it's still, who are we book talking? Who are we investing money in? Who are we holding up and blessing in front of children? I looked up last night, what are the most commonly read books in the United States? And I think about this because these are the same books that I read when I went to high school for a year in 1993 in Lenox, Massachusetts. Why is my niece, who just graduated high school, reading the same books that I read 27 years ago. Why are we not pushing back? And we'll talk more about this because there's incredible work shared by the women of Disrupt Text that have really started a national conversations around this. But we have to bring this into our own districts too, and not just the books, but the texts, the media, because this shapes children's reading lives. Where can students access books and how? We are so quick to put so many obstacles in the place in front of children for them to not get the books. We put fines on books or tell them they can only check out 2 books at a time or come up with elaborate checkout systems in our own classrooms, stopping kids from just dropping by and picking up a book. Why? Why is it so hard to trust a child with a book? I believe it's Nancy Atwell that says, if you don't lose a lot of books, you don't have the right books. What are they expected to do once they finish a book? What does reading homework look like? What does accountability look like when it comes to all of this? And how are a child's reading emotions cared for? Because that's truly the work that I do. Reading emotions, reading identity, which really is just identity. When I talk to my students about when they decided they were no longer readers or why they stopped liking reading, so many of their answers are tied in with the work surrounding reading and not the act of reading itself. Or that's where it started. And now it's everything to do with reading. And so when we have had these conversations, we can then fall into creating staff rights, reading rights for all of our students. And this is just a snapshot of the reading rights that my 7th grade English team has worked on and put together. And this took time. And this is a living, breathing document that we come back to, that we check in with. Are we still giving them authentic and full choice? Are we still protecting their independent reading time? Are we looking at discussions and time for ownership through finding out what they need through surveys, reflection, and all of that? Are we looking at our own biases and the systemic obstacles that have been placed within our reading instructions for all kids? Are we reading ourselves? Are we sharing our reading journey? And again, what are the texts that are accessible to kids? To quote Dr. Sims Bishop, are they windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors? And I think about this isn't a one-time thing. Sure, the document was created a few years ago, but we come back to it. We recommit to it. We change it as we know more. And when we hire new people, we bring them into this. We hold these up and say, these are the things that we hold sacred. Can you be a part of that? But then how do we go from making a beautiful vision and statement to centering this work on the actual kids we teach? Because I don't know about you, but I have sat through a lot of beautiful vision statement creation committees, and then I didn't see it play out in the school, despite our best intentions. So how do we take these documents and put them into place? So a couple of things I want to share as we go into the how. My schedule used to be 45 minutes. I'm so lucky right now that it's 90 minutes. But I'll tell you, 45 minutes still gave us time for independent reading. It was the most sacred thing we did every day, and we started with it so that it wasn't just at the end where it would become 9 minutes, then 7 minutes, then 5 minutes, and then it didn't happen. Now we start with a glorious 20 minutes of independent reading time. It allows kids to come in through the hustle and bustle and shut the world down. It allows me to check in with students, allows me to bookshop with students. It allows me to confer and talk to students about their reading journey and where they are and who they are. I think about how we cannot look at our schedule as one more obstacle. It is what it is, and I wish that I could give every educator 90 minutes of literacy time, but I know I can't. So then what are the components that we make time for? Because I've seen a lot of teachers stand in front of students and talk about the value of reading and then turn around and then say, we don't have time for it in class. What we make time for in class tells students directly what we hold most important. There's no way around it. And so if you only do independent reading once in a while, you're telling students that independent reading is really not that important. This is my very tentative map throughout the year. We do independent reading every single day of the year. It never loses its focus, but you can see September, beginning of October, it's really reestablishing reading identity. We do independent reading, short read alouds, memoir, text, picture books. Then we flip into the global read aloud that kicks off in October. This is where I teach comprehension skills. This is where I use read aloud to dig into the skills of reading, but there's still independent reading. Then we do our first round of book clubs leading up until winter break, because that's when kids are super chatty, and I'll talk about what book clubs look like. This is an emphasis on discussion, on community, on connecting with books that speak to us about the world that we live in right now. And then January hits, and it's almost like we never even started the work. The kids come back, it's dark in Wisconsin, it's snow, they forgot how to go to school. We did too as adults. And so we go back and we renew that focus on independent reading, short read alouds, we build community, we celebrate picture books through our mock Caldecott unit, and then we start moving into another round of book clubs. It's deeper analysis, deeper identity work. How does this book connect with your life? How will you be moved by this book? And kids have a lot of choice, and at the end, we do a short read aloud, or either short read alouds or a longer read aloud. And then we talk about how reading transforms us. Now, there's skills taught throughout all of this, but the way that we access reading as a community changes. It gives us many different opportunities to dive into reading, and we tie our writing into all of this as well. And we center everything that we do around this central question: who am I as a reader? Because really that translates to, who am I as a human being? And so these are the 6 components that I'll be going into more detail with in the next 3 sessions for this masterclass. But we're going to start with community, because it all starts with community. What do kids experience when they come to us? What are the reading experiences? Every child is guaranteed. And we can look at the words of Stephen Krashen and remember that children read more when they see other people reading. And for a long time, people took that to mean like I should sit down and read in front of my students, but I don't have time for that. When my students are reading, it's my chance to talk to them, to build community, to help them on their individual journey. So instead, we have to create an environment where kids maybe see us reading sometimes, but they also know that we are readers because we talk about the reality of being an adult readers. And this is not my idea. I first learned about it from Jillian Heisey, who runs Classroom Book a Day, another fantastic project that highlights the importance of reading picture books, that every staff member displays their reading. This is my interrupted reading bulletin board from when we shut down on March 13th. This is in front of my classroom. My classroom would be to your right, looking at this. It starts conversations. Every staff member has this poster. It's the gray in the middle. You can barely see it. It says Mrs. Ripp just read. And this goes not just for our teachers, but our staff and our secretary and our guidance counselors and our principals. And they read the books and they talk about the books. And not everybody does the book covers, because not everybody reads as many books, or maybe they don't have time to display it, but everybody has a poster of what they just read. It starts conversations. Our principal gives out book recommendations to kids. Our secretary and I talk books, and she talks books with the kids that sit and wait in the office for whatever reason. It builds community. Kids come up and say, oh, I want to read that book. Do you have that book? Or they'll say, oh, I love that book, Mrs. Ripp. Did you like it? It's a way to start conversations. We also got the idea last year from Amber Tiemann to do a birthday book card. We went to Books for School, which is a fantastic warehouse here in Madison, but they also have a beautiful online presence, and they're open right now, where they buy all of the overflow books from publishers. And I'm not talking about those dusty books that nobody wanted to get. I am talking about all the books that you see on this image, all came from Books to School, or Books for School, and they were all less than $3. They have K through 12, and they have Spanish, English, Arabic, and Hmong books, picture books, chapter books, all sorts of books, and they are fantastic. Every child on their birthday, or if they don't choose, or if they don't celebrate their birthday, then at some point during the year, they get invited down to select a book from the birthday book cart. We want to give kids the gift of another book, and we do it in groups. My principal does it in groups so that kids can talk while they're book shopping, and she does it grade levels across, and kids recommend books, and it is just a fantastic, beautiful sight to see. Or a book stamp, a way to start conversations. The original idea was from Cassie Thomas, or at least where I saw it from, and then Corinna Allen had shown it. I have a stamp that says, Mrs. Ripp has read and loved this book. Ask her about it. If you don't want the name of someone on it, maybe school division or school department, your librarian has loved this book. Ask her about it. It's one more way to start conversations about books. Because the more we talk about reading, the more we build a community. There are lots of other ideas that I've seen play out. Favorite book displays throughout the school, of course, protecting on librarians. We focus on joy versus the scores. We fund books. I know it sounds crazy, but why are we expected to fund books when you don't expect, as Donna Lynn Miller would say, the basketball coach to go out and buy the basketball in most instances, the science teacher to go out and buy the microscope? Why, as English teachers and teachers who teach reading, that we're expected to buy our own books? It doesn't make any sense. We showcase book recommendations on announcements from adults, from students. We invite other adults into book clubs for children's books so that they can see what is new and so they can talk to their students about the books that are out there. We have a communal reading time every single week on Thursdays for 21 minutes. The whole school is expected to sit down and read, teachers included, staff included. We read together, or we read our individual books. Or we sit down and do a book club, or we read picture books, but for those 21 minutes, we don't check email. We read, and we talk about our books. We have book swap trees throughout the school. We think about representation, inclusion, and it is an urgent matter. Not one where we go, well, maybe our community is not ready for better inclusivity and better representation. Our kids need it. Our kids deserve it. And then, of course, we are constantly reflecting on the obstacles in place for students to find joy in reading. And we're constantly going through and disseminating our own practices and our own beings and noticing the obstacles that we are creating. Is it my comments about what makes a book easy or not? Is it the lack of representation within my curriculum? Is it that kids have to earn choice and then we do something about it? There are so many other ideas that you can share. And so I want to end here and open it up to a few questions, but I also want to point out that I have office hours this Sunday at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 10 a.m. Central, and I will gladly take any questions and show any kind of stuff that I can. The next session, so the next hour in this masterclass, is going to dive into collections, building your collections, and then also setting up community in our classrooms and the beginning of the year work. As I know more from my district, I'm certainly also starting to think about what might this look like potentially in a hybrid or a fully online, and I will gladly share all ideas that I have, but knowing that they have not been tried and tested yet. These are just beautiful ideas, or maybe not so beautiful, that I can share. So for the last couple minutes, I will take any questions, and I am going to stop sharing my screen. There we go. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see you. I can't see you when I'm presenting. It's the strangest, oddest thing. Yes. Are there any questions? You can put it. Can we access the presentation? You can't, only because it's copyrighted. So I don't share my presentations. How can I best fight the classics only culture? We will talk more about that next week. The first step that I would tell you to go, though, is to go and learn from the Disrupt Text community. I have learned so much from the 4 women behind it. They have really provided a fantastic guide of going, okay, so if my school district is locked into the classics, how can I still navigate and bring in other texts, or how can I start the conversation? I have learned so much from them, and I will absolutely share more ideas next week. But I would start there because they have really been fundamental in my own thinking and pushing my own thinking. And also, I want us to also think about, we often think that in younger grades, we don't have a canon. We fully 100% have a canon. If you start talking to students about like, what are the read alouds, you will start to see a huge overrepresentation of white voices. And you'll see that teachers we like to hang on to our favorite read alouds, right? Year after year after year. And then that becomes the canon for kids. And so that's also part of like a district reading audit is what are they listening to in their read alouds? What is in their book clubs? Whose voices are being centered? And we'll talk more about that next week too. Yeah, and I'll tell you, like running the Global Read Aloud, the #1 book that gets recommended the most for the Global Read Aloud every single year. I don't know if anyone wants to take a guess in the chat. I'll give you like 10 seconds. 10 seconds. What is the #1 recommended book every single year that we should do in the Global Read Aloud? Somebody usually always gets it. Wonder. Yes, Wonder. And it's like problematic. Like, I'm all about being kind to a certain point. Like at some point we use kindness as a way to tone police kids. And so there are times where I'm not going to choose kind because I'm choosing to be angry because I need to be angry. and I think we tone police kids way too much when it comes to that. So yeah, interesting, right? Wonder every year. Wonder. So the disrupt text handle, if you Google with the hashtag disrupt text, you will go to their website and then you will see Dr. Parker and Julia Torres and Lorena Herman and Trisha Barvia, who are the 4 women behind it. It will take you to their individual work, their Twitter handles, all of the amazing articles they've read. They also run webinars, like there's YouTube, there's so much there. So that's why I say like always go to that because that will give you like the entire map of the incredible work that they have done. Yeah, I bet. I don't like Wonder much. I mean, I do up until the end, and then it becomes really problematic. So Joni, how do you get your student voice in your classes for sharing what they love to read? We'll talk about that because yeah, that's a culture piece and a community piece, and I'll give ideas for that too. And so I would give you such a short answer now that it wouldn't give you the full scope of what we do. Sorry, there's so many chats. You can speak too if you would like. Yeah, the second, okay, so the second masterclass, there, for many of you, you may have noticed we didn't even have a link up for this one yet. They're working on it. It will be next Wednesday, but at 3:30 p.m. Central Time, so 1:30 PST, because I'm in professional development earlier than that. The link should be up, and I will make sure I share it on all of my social platforms. So if you follow me anywhere, the minute I will blast it out and get it out to people. I know there's been some cumbersome, yeah. Well, thanks everyone. Websites and blogs. Oh, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Hi. I have a quick question. You mentioned earlier the books for schools. Is it books for the number?
Yes.
Okay. So I found the right one. Awesome.
Yeah. And shipping is not that expensive either. And their stock goes over really quickly because they'll get like 80 copies of the new Jason Reynolds book, and it's like $2.85. So I always like check them. Usually I go there once a month, but clearly they've been shut down. So I've been checking online instead.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I'm just always amazed. I mean, most of my book club sets come from there because I can go and buy 5 copies of a book for $15. And like I said, it's not the dusty
books that no one wants to read. Like, it's where I've gotten almost all of my Jason Reynolds sets, my Jackie Woodson sets, my Laurie Halse Anderson, and also a lot of my picture books. And they have a really big mission as a family. It's a third generation family that owns it. And their mission too is for inclusive representation and for all kids, which I am 100% behind. And so they are really trying to pull in, they're very tapped into like, what are the books that are being shared and can we get them somehow, which I love. So
I love that.
Yeah, it's been a real game changer for me in order to build my own collection, because as much as I want to buy all the books, I can't buy all the books.
Right.
And also replenishing, right? Like, we lose books, or books just get worn out. So,
But thank you. This has been amazing, just awesome. You're an awesome presenter as well. So thank you for your passion. You can feel it coming through. So thank you so much for this session. I'll see you in another